Good afternoon. Welcome to Capital Account. I'm Lauren Lister here in Washington, D.C. These are your headlines for Tuesday, October 9th, 2012. The IMF lowers growth forecasts, offering its bleakest assessment of global growth prospects since the 2009 recession and raising the risk of recession, according to the Wall Street Journal. But is the IMF already late to the party? And it upgraded only one major nation versus its previous forecast, the U.S. But based on what? We are in a QE-induced coma. We'll talk to Mike Shedlock about all this and the calculus behind jobs numbers. Plus, Angela Merkel is in Athens. She reportedly offered words of support for her Greek counterpart. Well, that's easy, because talk is pretty cheap. It's far more expensive to bail out countries, the conditions of bailouts, and debt write-downs. Words of support don't pay the bills or reignite a stalled economy. We'll discuss and look at where the mainstream media has gotten this thing all wrong. Plus, Iran faces hyperinflation. Or does it? We'll talk about the economic impact of sanctions, price controls, and whether it's better to lose purchasing power quickly and noticeably rather than slowly but surely. You know what I'm talking about, who I'm talking about. Let's get to today's Capital Account. The U.S. jobs numbers were released Friday from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which typically, I think it's fair to say, gets one solid day of play in the news cycle. But not this time, because the unemployment rate dipped to 7.8%. And some high-profile folks, such as former GE CEO Jack Welch, suggested Obama's team manipulated the data to give the president a boost. Well, our guest is here to dispel conspiracy theories around the drop, which is not to say that jobs numbers aren't manipulated, but rather that they're manipulated on an ongoing basis. One economist argued in past tough times, look at this, the unemployment rate has been low only because government programs, especially Social Security disability, have effectively been buying people off the unemployment rolls and reclassifying them as not in the labor force. In other words, the government has cooked the books. That was from back in 2003. Austin Goolsbee writing. You may know him. He went on to be an Obama aide. He was citing loosening standards for qualifying for disability payments in the 80s and 90s, so people who would normally be counted as unemployed started moving to the disability system, and you can see how those numbers have steadily increased. That chart goes up into today. It was the 80s and 90s that those standards were loosened, and this trend has continued during the recent downturn. The number of workers receiving disability insurance jumped 22% from December 2007 to April 2012. This is Bloomberg reporting this, citing Social Security data. So looking at the labor force participation rate, there you can see it has been falling. This is something that we talk about month after month, and the rise in disability could account for as much as a quarter of the decline in the labor force participation rate during this time from 2007 to 2012, according to some economists. So this is just one factor, possibly clouding or complicating the unemployment picture that we headline every month, we meaning the media collectively. Join me today to discuss all of this, though, is Mike Shedlock, better known as Mish. He's investment advisor for Sitka Pacific Capital, author of the popular blog Mish's Global Economic Analysis. And I'm really glad that you're here today, Mish, because I want to spend some time on this. This latest fervor around the jobs numbers is a great opportunity to really probe into what goes into these. So thanks for being here.
Oh, pleasure to be on the show again, Lauren. Always seems to be some kind of big controversy when I'm on here. This time, heading right into the election, big controversy on jobs. And former CEO Jack Welch lit the fire there with a tweet that, what, 1.5 million people saw or something like that. I
know, that's for sure. That tweet went very far, and then other people jumped into his camp, people like Donald Trump, who is outspoken on many issues, to put it mildly. So just to get this cleared up with September, you think the kind of the blatant accusations of manipulation, that those are conspiracies, correct?
Oh, I think, well, those are the conspiracy theories. And a lot of people emailed me that and said, well, you know, Mish, look at this. These numbers are unbelievable. Actually, it was Jack Welch that said these numbers are unbelievable. And I dove into them and I said, well, certainly it could be an outlier. You know, unbelievable. Unbelievable how, I guess, is the way. Do I think the BLS is cooking the books per se? No, a lot of these people were hired under the Bush administration. They're not Democrats. The BLS doesn't consist of a bunch of Democrats cooking the books for Obama. You know, rather, you know, they do their job, and sometimes there's outliers and sometimes there's not. Certainly the preceding 3 months were really horrendous. We had kind of a snapback. Why? Well, we can discuss that a little bit. But if they were actually going out there and manipulating the data, I think someone would squawk. Someone would be raising the red flag saying, look at this, look at what Obama's doing.
Okay, so not a conspiracy.
That's where conspiracy theories fall short.
Okay,
Lauren.
I totally hear you there. So you chalk this up to a conspiracy theory. So let's just square away the September numbers in terms of what came out in them and how to square those corners. So 873,000 jobs added, according to the household survey. This was the most 3 months. The prior 3 months had little change. This was the most since 2003. According to accounts. So where did these jobs all come from, or why was this amount added?
Well, actually, in the prior 2 months, there was a loss of 119,000 jobs 1 month and something like 100 another month. So, you know, here we were all of a sudden losing 200,000 jobs and then going to this monstrously big number. And I dove into some of the details. 582,000 of them were part-time jobs. If you look at the U6 unemployment rate, it stayed flat. That means the entire 0.3 of a point drop in the unemployment rate was all based, 100% of it was based on part-time workers. Now, is that reasonable or not? I don't know. But I did a post just earlier this afternoon with some analysis that said, well, perhaps this is related to Obamacare. In the Obamacare bill, and I think we're just finding out some of the details that are in it. Remember, Nancy Pelosi said, well, we've got to pass it to see what's in it. But, you know, there's provisions in there that give that are very onerous on full-time employment. So, you know, right as this kicks in, are corporations going to contractors and part-time workers here? I don't know, but it's a possible explanation, and it's a certainly much more reasonable explanation than we've seen regarding conspiracy theories.
Yeah. So, but just to be clear, because the Obamacare theory, is that a theory at this point, or is there anything to lend credence to it at this point in terms of that September rise in part-time employment?
I don't know. I mean, I guess my question would be, why is this all of a sudden? You know, is this some sort of year-end effect? That's the reason why I don't know. But the theory says, and I looked at it, and I looked at the data, and I looked at provisions in the bill that, you know, actually are, you know, pretty onerous in terms of what it's going to cost to hire full-time people. So I don't know, maybe there was a sudden hiring spurge and all of the people just happened to be part-time or contractors to not, so that they would not have to, you know, pay for Obamacare. I don't know. I think 1 month can easily still be an outlier. That's actually my number one choice here, is that they're going to revise some of this away. But there's a chance that part of it is also Obamacare. So those are the two factors, I think, and we'll need to analyze that further in the months to come. Conspiracy? No, don't think so. Okay,
and just one more thing so I can show our viewers how the rise in the part-time workers factors in, looking at it broadly. So at the far end, you can see part-time workers. So 582,000 were added last month, and this was just the largest rise that we've seen since 2011 for 1 month. So, Mish, you think this could be a statistical anomaly versus really 582,000 jobs coming online all at once?
Yes, exactly. I mean, some people were telling me, well, they expected this to happen because of the election, and others said, I got emails from people, well, Mish, you know, look at this. I mean, this is just seasonal hiring patterns from teachers going back to school, back to class. No, that explanation doesn't hold water either, Lauren, because these are seasonally adjusted numbers. If it was just teachers going back to work, we would have seen this pattern before, but we haven't. This is an outlier, I believe.
Okay, so outlier is the key takeaway for this. So now we've got September squared away, this kind of weird report that we think could be an outlier. Let's look at the bigger picture of unemployment, because I think it's an important conversation to have about the ways that the figures are not necessarily overtly manipulated, as in Obama calling the BLS saying we need a higher rate, but in the way that people are counted as unemployed, what's counted as the labor force. And you heard me at the beginning of the show, I was interested to hear Austin Goolsbee in 2003 talking about how Social Security disability insurance and how the parameters for that had been expanded, so more people were going onto the disability rolls and weren't being counted as unemployed. And so this was kind of skewing what we look at as unemployment. And is this one factor that you think kind of skews the picture that we consider to be the unemployment picture?
Absolutely. My gosh, between 2010 and May of this year, 2.2 million, 2.2 million people went on Social Security disability. How much of that is fraud? I don't know, pick a number. But let's say half of it's fraud, because that's what I think. And we also saw that rise at exactly the same time, Lauren, as people were expiring all of their 99 weeks of unemployment insurance benefits. So they're collecting unemployment insurance. They no longer can. They work it out with their doctor that they can file for not a physical disability. A lot of these are mental disabilities. Well, how do you prove that? And doctors are saying, oh, well, I'll write you a little note here, you know, like your teacher wrote you when you wanted to play hooky from school. Oh, Joey's sick. Well, doctors are doing this. The problem is this is costing taxpayers a lot of money if that's what's happening. And I'm sure that is a portion of it as well. And
we don't know if it's fraud. We don't know if perhaps some of these people that have been disabled would work in better times because there were jobs available and they would just choose to do that. And now those jobs aren't available, so they are on disability. We don't know. I don't want to make a moral assessment personally, but I do want to ask, in terms of the invisible unemployed, what other groups are important to look at? So we have disability as one that is not included in the unemployment figures, the U3 that we look at. Are there other invisible unemployed that aren't counted?
Oh, absolutely. Students are the big ones. Students are staying in school longer because there's no jobs. And also you have, and remember, if you're in school, you're not considered part of the labor force. Therefore, you're not considered to be unemployed if you don't have a job. So we also have seen middle-aged workers going back to school. Obama and, well, actually every administration is pressing people, oh, you just need training. I don't think it's a training issue. You're not going to retrain a truck driver into being a Java programmer or a Java programmer into being an auto mechanic. But that's what's happening. People are going back to school, trying to get classes, wanting to improve themselves because the for-profit schools are pushing this. Oh, you need to go back to school. We'll get you a job. Well, great. Most of these people are, graduating and finding out, there's no jobs here. But while that's going on, all those people aren't counted as being part of the labor force. The BLS in 2006 estimated that in 2010, the labor force would be 156 million. 156.5 million, I think.
Okay.
It's now 155 million. And we're almost 3 years later here, going on into 2013. So the BLS was way off. This was another argument that I kind of squabble I'd gotten into about the participation rate.
Yeah, and the participation rate we've seen dramatically decrease, and you're saying even more than the BLS anticipated. So that's the other factor that's really impacted the actual unemployment rate in a way that may not be completely accurate. I want to continue this conversation after a quick break, Mish. We'll have more with Mike Shedlock, though, investment advisor for Sitka Pacific Capital. And also, still ahead, Angela Merkel arrives in Greece and protesters take to the streets. But what makes mainstream headlines? We'll talk about financial and perception troubles on the other side of the world in loose change. But first, your closing market numbers.
Here's Mitt Romney trying to figure out the name of that thing that we Americans call a donor. I'm sorry. I'm just a guy who cares an awful lot about my country.
You, sir, are a fool. You know what? Cut his mic.
Are there terrorist cells in your
The far
neighborhood?
left does not want the USA to defeat terrorism.
You cannot be a liberal and a Christian.
Republicans lie.
It's really so stupid.
You know, the corporate media distracts us from what you and I should care about because they're a profit-driven industry that sells us sensationalistic garbage and calls it breaking news. I'm Abby Martin, and we're gonna break the set.
Welcome back. We're talking about the unemployment numbers and the way that the books are or are not cooked, depending on what you consider it. But I think it's important to understand what is left out of these numbers and how to better get an accurate gauge of the job situation, especially when this is such an important economic issue and also a political one going into elections. So Mike Shedlock has been talking to us about all of this. He's investment advisor at Sika Pacific Capital. And Mish, we're going to switch gears in a minute to the IMF projections, but I do want to stay on unemployment for one more moment because I want to ask, is there any accurate gauge, you think, of what the true unemployment situation is in the U.S.? For example, the U6.
Everyone, has their own perception. I think we ought to come up with a more realistic way. I saw a proposal last week, based off of, some other factors. Let's make it simple, Lauren. If you don't have a job and want a job, you're unemployed. Now, what would that number be? That number would be more like U5 unemployment, but you also have to add in 2 million on disability. You've got to add in some other people like that. So the real unemployment rate here, not counting the part-time workers, would be more along the lines of about 10%. That's what I think. That's the people who want a job and don't have one. Add in people who are working part-time for economic reasons. In other words, they want a full-time job but don't. That gets you an unemployment rate of around 15%. And then we can argue whether or not they're fudging any of those numbers or not. But, take your choice. Include part-timers, it's about 15. Don't include part-timers, it's about 10. Realistically, the unemployment rate is about 10%, in my opinion. And you get that just by adding back in all these discouraged workers, all the disability fraud, all the things like that. Very simple calculation and a very simple definition, Lauren.
Very simple definition. Do you want a job? Do you have one? Okay, no, you're unemployed. I'm totally with you there. I think that it's such a weird world when maybe someone that's homeless on the streets would not be counted as unemployed because they haven't looked for work for 4 weeks or whatever. So let's move on to the IMF, because the IMF today came out with global growth forecasts. They reduced them, most of them, from their prior estimates, and this made headlines, front page news in the Wall Street Journal. But what you and I were talking about earlier, is the IMF late to the game on this?
Oh my gosh, of course they're late to the game. We were talking about this, Lauren, right here on Capitol Account, I believe back in January. I said the IMF's going to be dramatically lowering their growth forecast. Well, they didn't dramatically lower them, they just lowered them. So I think they're still way off the mark. I think more of these revisions are coming down the pike. I think France in particular is going to be shockingly bad. I think Germany is going to be bad. There are a lot of things happening in Europe that they've just not accounted for. Also, we had this discussion last week, and certainly nothing was settled as a basis of the last jobs report. But I think the U.S. is back in recession, and also we've got the fiscal cliff coming up. Are they really going to let all these tax hikes go into play? All the defense cuts? Well, they're not really cuts, Laura. They're a reduction in the amount of deficit. Actually, the deficit is even going up. So they're cutting what they estimated they wanted the budget to be. So, and we also have the Fed cheerleading that. Just, think about that for a second. Would the Fed really be pressing Congress this way if the economy was a lot stronger? So no, there's economic weakness everywhere. It shows up in the participation rate. It shows up in the Fed cheerleading. Actually, it shows up in Fed panic, which I think we talked about.
Right.
And the IMF is way off the mark here. They're going to be lowering these forecasts, rest assured.
I love that. The headline is that the IMF downgrades forecast. You say these are still far too rosy. We just have a minute, but the one nation that the IMF upgraded was the U.S. And as you said, I think the U.S. is in recession. We've talked about that before. Others I talked to think a U.S. recession is baked in the cake. So what gives with the IMF?
They're late to every party, Lauren. They're late to every party.
So there you go. Late to every party, but Mish, you are very much here for the party. I really appreciate you being on the show and expounding upon all of this from unemployment to global growth. Thanks so much, Mike Shedlock, investment advisor for Sitka Pacific Capital.
Pleasure to be on the show.
All right, let's wrap up with loose change. Dimitri Kofinas. So much to talk about in the world today.
A lot. We're going to be talking about a lot today on loose change.
We sure are. Let's get saddled up and ready to go because German Chancellor Angela Merkel got saddled up and she left for Greece. She arrived there today for an official visit with the country, for which there is so much contention between the two, Germany and Greece, I would argue. And while she offered support to the Greek prime minister, the Greeks, at least those that got their pictures on TV, didn't seem very supportive of her. We have footage, I believe, that we're going to show. Protesters took to the streets carrying some banners saying Merkel out, Greece is not your colony, and this is not a European Union, it's slavery. U.S. media also commented on the protest. Check out Joe Scarborough's rant this morning while talking about Merkel's arrival.
If you're pouring into the streets to bitch about the Germans carrying you on your shoulders while you're too lazy and stupid to pass tax reform and make real spending cuts so you can keep with your 3-hour work week, Greece, bad idea.
Wow.
Did you not see that before?
With friends like that on the mainstream media, who needs enemies? Angela Merkel doesn't need to do anything. She has U.S. mainstream media pundits on her side. That's absurd. What we were reflecting on earlier is the way that the media in the U.S. that we watch portrays the situation in Greece.
Yeah, first caveat, I don't even think that Angela Merkel would want that. I mean, Joe Scarborough is a complete idiot. Like, you're an idiot, Joe. You're a complete retard. Sorry. I mean, like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? I mean, how do you go out and say things like that about an entire nation of people and say, I mean, it's ridiculous. But anyway, beside the point, yeah, I mean, we're talking about how the media misrepresents and misunderstands Greece entirely. And I think that they like to take they like to put Greece inside like a larger European Union and say Greece's problems are about austerity and it's something that we can relate to with other countries in Europe, but it's not. I mean, Greece is its own country with its own unique history, its own problems, and in fact, austerity, which is really just, you know, the cut into the deficit, is really just something that sparked the powder keg that had been accumulating, all that gunpowder that had been accumulating for all these decades in Greece. And all of a sudden now people are like, whoa, they woke up and they said, after all this looting, after you stole all this money for all these years, took all this money, took it outside the country, foreign bank accounts, all these people were really rich all these years making money through government, all of a sudden now we're going to have to eat the depression as a result of all the stuff that you guys ate all these years. It's ridiculous. But that's the story in Greece. That's why people are so angry. People would not be so angry just because of some budget deficit cuts. It's a lot more than that.
Well, it is a lot more than that, but I think that what we see is whatever is convenient to whatever your political agenda is or whatever your platform is, you can easily just blame it on austerity, and then it kind of precludes any discussion of cuts or tax reform in countries that arguably need it, like the U.S., because you can just say austerity and people are programmed to go, oh no, austerity is bad, we're going to be Greece. And you see people on both sides of the aisle use this argument. And before we move on to the next story, I just want to bring up a tweet that a Greek journalist tweeted that I thought kind of summed it up. Even if Merkel decides to write off the Greece debt today, foreign media will still see the 20 people who burn Nazi flags and throw stones at the police. I mean, it's just kind of always the focus of any kind of coverage that Greece gets is when it has good pictures of people protesting, throwing Molotov cocktails.
Yeah, by the way, I do want to say something. I misspoke before. I used a word I shouldn't have used. Sorry about that one.
When you said a lot?
No, something before that. I just thought of it now, but anyway, point is, yeah.
The R word?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I didn't mean to do that. I got angry. I saw Joe and that thing really, it really got me upset. Like seeing him say that really got me upset. It really got me upset. I had no plan on even going off on Joe Scarborough.
Okay.
But that's like a crazy clip.
Well, you're Greek, so you're somewhat entitled to have some personal outrage.
I was there this summer for 6 days, and it was incredibly depressing.
Yeah.
And it's just ridiculous to have some guy say lazy, 30-hour work weeks, go to the beach, blah, blah, and it's a complete misrepresentation.
Yeah.
It's slanderous.
Okay.
It makes it easy to target the country.
Yeah. Let's move on to another story, but your insight is appreciated, Dimitri, I'm sure, by many of our viewers. Greece isn't the only place with money problems. Just pick a country pretty much. But Iran is facing what some call hyperinflation. Some say that this is actually not the situation at all. But the rial has depreciated significantly against the dollar since August.
The rial has lost 80% to the dollar, and a sign that sanctions are working insofar that it's hurting the Iranian economy, but doesn't seem to be persuading the authorities to change their nuclear path.
Okay, sanctions are working. Dimitri, what do you think?
Well, there's this. Because
you've been looking into the economics behind this.
I didn't have a chance to really read into this at all the past few weeks it's been going on. So they're definitely working in the sense that they're having an effect. The question is, are they having a desired effect? And what I thought was interesting from the analysis is that the
working in the sense that they're crippling Iran's economy to some degree.
Right, exactly. But what's interesting about this is that the Iranian government, because they have such a strong control over the economy, they're able to put in price controls for basically the necessities, food and medicine, that are most important for the lowest class in society, right? And they allow the inflation to seep up disproportionately to the middle class. And why is that important? Because Iran's middle class has been growing for all these years, right? They've been benefiting a lot through the economic growth and things like that. And the middle class is the more educated class and the class more likely from which change will come about.
Well, here's the thing that I would say. I mean, if they're subsidizing the poor for essentials, isn't that what a responsible government kind of would do in a situation that was so dire?
But exactly, that's the thing. So that strengthens the role of the state in Iran.
So that actually gives them power with their citizenry, which is probably not what the U.S. or Western countries would technically like to try to achieve with these crushing sanctions. One point I want to make that I think was a really interesting point that Addison Wiggin made on the Daily Reckoning today was, okay, the real question is kind of what is more significant? What is the difference between if your currency depreciates all at once very rapidly or if it depreciates 82% of purchasing power over 40 years, as in the case of the U.S. dollar, which I thought was an interesting perspective to put it in because you don't see as many headlines when it depreciates over time, but nonetheless, the decline is there. Okay, we got to go. We'll leave it there. Thanks for watching and have a great night. Come back tomorrow. And in the meantime, you know you can follow me on Twitter at Lauren Lister. You can like our Facebook page right there. You can watch us on YouTube. Give us any feedback. I'll respond on Friday. Watch us in HD on Hulu. And from everyone here, you can go have yourself a great night.